Hi, my name's Jude Hannam. I'm the Networks and Communities Manager at DEFI, which stands for the Digital Education Futures Initiative. Today's topic is of great interest to me personally as a former classroom teacher and EdTech enthusiast. This session is one I would have liked to have had if I'd still been in the classroom, and it almost makes me want to go back as well. So we are pleased to welcome more than 300 of you from around the globe to today's programme, or at least those are signed up. We're hoping you'll carry on coming in. We're near the 100 mark now. We have a brief questionnaire we'd be grateful for you to answer now so we can share the attendee list with you during the course of the webinar. Just a quick reminder, the chat button, please use the chat button for sort of networking and open discussion, but post the Q&A button to submit your questions so we can keep track of them. And we have had some some questions submitted in advance. We're looking forward to more from you in the session. So let's get started. To briefly introduce our panel today, you've met me. I'm a former primary school teacher in the UK and the European school system. Steve Watson is an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at Cambridge. He teaches sociology, philosophy education, mathematics education, and contributes to the training of mathematics teachers. His research themes include mathematics education, politics, education policy making and media, professional learning, and AI in education. He's also done a stint in the classroom, and prior to that, he was a telecommunications engineer. He's currently very involved in the Faculty of Education's angle on the use of ChatGPT in higher education. Tim Hallas is one of the country's leading music technology educators, currently head of music and technology and digital teaching and learning at Hills Road Sixth Form College, just down the road from the faculty here in Cambridge. He's a freelance writer and speaks regularly at music technology, speaks regularly on music technology education. He's just started a PhD in educational technology pedagogy. Dr. Maria Andersen has spent most of her career teaching, writing curriculum, and developing digital products for learning. After 10 years as a college professor, she stepped out of academia to embrace online learning and the underlying technologies behind it. Recently, she returned to the classroom, having new teaching adventures in kindergarten to 12, middle and high school. And I came across her with fantastic tweets, which she's now segued to her own website and to Instagram. LinkedIn. So more of that later. Without further ado, can I hand over to you, Steve?
Right, so here we are. So I'm just going to talk for just under 10 minutes about ChatGPT in modern education systems and some of the opportunities, challenges and ethics. And this is connected to the research that I've been doing around how education organizations and institutions deal with things like ChatGPT in their practices and how they regulate them. So an overview of what I'm going to talk about here. So a little bit about the model. I'm not going to go into a great deal of technical depth in this, but give you a more prosaic view of what it's doing, and also to think about some of the opportunities that we're already seeing within education more generally, but schools in particular, and then some of the limitations, theoretical potentials, and of course the ethical dimensions to that. Right, so the first thing, what is ChatGPT? Well, people who work in machine learning have said to me that this is no more than sophisticated use of mathematics that would be familiar to A-level students. But together that makes quite a complex piece of technology designed to generate human-like text responses. And the background to this is the development of a series of models which go back at least 30 years, and it was the release of ChatGPT in November last year that captured the world's imagination, we might say, around being able to have a conversation with a machine, and that's produced lots of interest and public opinion and media responses to that. Now, underlying this, as I say, I'm not going to get too technical, but this is something I made earlier, and just talking about a little bit this architecture here from by inquiring of ChatGPT itself. And what ChatGPT is able to do when it's trained is recognize patterns in text at different levels. So whether that's at sentence, word level, discourse level, it's these patterns that are very important. And as you'll see in the theme of my brief introduction here is, this is quite different from how we've dealt with knowledge and information previously. And one of the things, of course, it's able to do is selectively attend to words in a prompt to try and identify context in which those patterns are. So the strengths of it, and these are things we're already seeing in education more generally, but specifically in schools, talking to teachers, talking to young people using it. First one is really about assisting in structuring the form of writing, helping with understanding grammar, structure, informal grammars. And I understand that in the context of neurodiversity, this is very helpful for students who find it difficult to structure their ideas, as the technology can help in doing that. Content generation, this is probably the one most talked about, offering instant information. We'll talk about that a little bit more and about the limitations of that, but that seems to be the issue that's captured everyone's imagination about what content it can produce and the factuality of that content. And one of the experiences we're having in the small projects that are starting to emerge about this use is the extent to which this can personalize learning. The limitations, of course, are clear in that it can't understand nuance or subtlety or context. It does not generate original ideas or perform critical thinking, and that's really important because one of the things that it seems to be able to do is generate content, but the limits of that are the knowledge base. It's not actually connected to the internet when it's working, so it's no reference to knowledge or information. So in terms of the practical use, primarily we can see this as a study aid for students, assisting with understanding homework in more detail, for instance, by using prompts from the homework to explore questions more deeply, using alongside existing search engines and databases. This useful way in which you can define and explain complex words and ideas, something I hear repeatedly from people who use it. And it shouldn't be underestimated the potential use for teachers in assisting with assessment and feedback, and also generating content for the classroom, and including potentially lesson plans. And finally, as an administrative tool, it is remarkable capability with scheduling and automatic reminders, and it can be programmed to do any number of administrative tasks where you want information transformed from one form into another, and these are very valuable. One of the things to think about here, this is a deeper philosophical thing, but really it's becoming increasingly important in understanding ChatGPT and its implications for education and learning, is how we think about knowledge, information, and meaning. And here particularly, I'm thinking about knowledge and meaning. And knowledge relates specifically to search engines and databases. That's been one of the growing means by which we're looking for some kind of reference to fact and information in the source, in the pursuit of education, but in the pursuit of research and scholarship as well. Now, large language models like ChatGPT work on something slightly different. They work on meaning, and we might explore what I mean by meaning in this sense as we discuss this. But what it can identify, and I'll explain this mid-journey generation very briefly shortly, but what meaning is, it is those patterns and structures that exist in text that are, and in images that I explained at the beginning. And what ChatGPT is able to do, like other large language learning models, is once trained, have a huge statistical reference point to billions of different kinds of patterns. So it immediately you introduce a prompt, it's able to match up with certain sets of enduring meanings that are in our text, that's structures and patterns. So thinking in terms of knowledge and meaning is quite important. Now, let's just think about where this might go. This idea about the theoretical potential of ChatGPT, I've referred to this, and this idea of how it makes meaning, and this pattern recognition as the basis in which it can generate text, and what I explained in recognizing patterns and being able to respond to those patterns. So in many ways, you can see this like as a universal translator. It'll take any text in one form or structure, and if you instruct it, it will transform it to another structure or form. To give you an example, if I want an academic paper about ChatGPT in the form of a blog or in the form of a newspaper article, it would the meaning would remain the same. And we've seen this with experiments looking at how, for instance, it translates English into Mandarin. Mandarin speakers say when I use it to translate that the meaning is clear, but no Chinese person would use Mandarin in that way. So this stability of meaning is very important. But primarily, I think what we're looking at is a huge increase in the possibility of personalised education as responses by teachers can be personalised to the individual. Now, there are going to be future advancements, but what I want to finish off by is thinking about the ethical considerations here, and we'll be discussing those. There are three main areas for this, and one is to do with data privacy concerns. And OpenAI have claimed that there's robust privacy measures, and we can talk about the limitations of that. The issue that potentially comes up, and I'm going to leave these open for discussion in the rest of the webinar, the potential for bias in AI. And the thing to think about, if we're using it as a tool for knowledge, knowledge is biased. Meanings have a different relationship to bias. So there's some interesting implications there. And this important, continually talking about it in the research, is the importance of human oversight. Now, that's my 10 minutes up. So there's plenty of there for us to discuss. I'm going to hand over, stop sharing my screen and hand over.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. That's a great start. Tim, can I bring you in to talk about how you're actually implementing and thinking about these things in a school setting, in a sixth form college setting?
Certainly. Hopefully you should be able to see my PowerPoint. So, hello everybody. My name's Tim Hallas, and as Jude has indicated, I work at Hills Road in Cambridge so I'm head of music tech, or technically I believe I'm course leader, and I have a digital teaching and learning role. So I work across the college looking at kind of all sorts of ways to use technology to support teaching and learning in the college. Just to give you kind of a bit of background on Hills Road, Hills Road is a largish sixth form college in Cambridge. We've got about 2,500 full-time students, and we only teach A-levels. We don't do any of the vocational courses yet, and we've got about 120 teaching staff. But we're a consistently high-achieving college, and we have very good grades, and we work incredibly hard for our students. I've just realised I'm not presenting correctly, so I'm so sorry. So AI at Hills Road we sort of started exploring this around Christmas time when it hit the kind of mainstream media, and I did some initial research into it. I kind of and I wrote a document which you can see a kind of brief snip of there on screen, and sort of shared this with our leadership team, and sort of they'd initially said, what do you think of this? And I'd already said, well, I've already been looking into this and here's what I found. And it And I would say that AI use at the college is very much in its infancy, and staff reaction has been largely mixed. So some people have been kind of using it a bit. Some people are kind of deeply worried about kind of the impact of it on learning. And I would say the vast majority of the staff are pretty much indifferent to it. They're kind of, it doesn't affect them. I've taught this course this way for 10 years. Why would I change now? But it's something that we are actively exploring, and a large number of the leadership are sort of feeding down to me some of the things they've been looking at and some of the things they're hearing at other conferences. And we're kind of developing a policy based on our own experiences and the wider sixth form sector. Now, you'll have heard from Steve some of the kind of things that it can be used for, but I thought I'd share with you some of the things that we are using it for. And this is very much student focused. So Steve talked about the content generation side of this. And one of the things that particularly I'm using it for is to create revision resources for my students. So what I would do is, so the prompt here, I would say, do you know this particular course? And it will say, certainly, how can I help? And then I'll tell it, create me 20 revision cards or something along those lines. And then I will ask it to create some questions, some revision questions. And then I'll embed those questions into a quiz, or I'll embed them into sort of a Kahoot or something larger. But what I would say is, and Steve alluded to this, is sometimes its answers can be overly simplistic. So when I asked it, tell me about the Edexcel music, give me 20 questions about the Edexcel A-level in music technology, it was asking me really, what is a computer? What is an audio interface? And I needed to kind of prompt it further and give it, say, okay, make these more challenging, make sure it's harder. And eventually it would output the questions. It was about kind of challenging it to kind of be more advanced. Other things that we've been getting it to do are asking it to create mark schemes. So on the previous question, I've got it to ask me some questions and some revision questions. I would then ask it, okay, present me a mark scheme to that. And it will happily do that. But the mark schemes are often quite vague. So again, you need to be very specific with the prompts you need to give it. And it needs to be specifically told, okay, mark it like this, how would it do? And then it's actually quite useful to get students to check answers with it as well. So I would get them to answer the questions I'd got ChatGPT to create, and then I would say, okay, feed your answer in. Here's the question, here's my answer, how did I do? And it will say whether the student did quite well or not. So you can see here I've put an example of that on the screen where I've answered a question it asked me and how well it thought I did. Now, obviously, I'm an expert in my subject, so I should get full marks, and I do. But when I've fed it answers that students have given it as part of an experiment, it sometimes comes out with varying different responses to how well the student has done, particularly on longer questions. It will sometimes say, this student has done well, but they could explore here. And sometimes they say they've done very badly, they've missed out huge parts. And it's exactly the same answer where I've just fed in multiple times. It's never quite certain, particularly on longer answers. Some of the other ways we're using it is getting it to summarize huge chunks of text. Now, Steve talked about kind of getting it to translate and all that sort of stuff, but it can often provide really useful summaries for students when they're trying to revise and trying to learn new topics. If there's large chunks of information, so when I've asked it for information, I'll say, okay, summarize that into bullet points for me, and it will output that. And then sometimes that's too long, so you can ask it to be even more concise, and it will sometimes distill information down to very clear points for you. And this is really helpful for students, particularly this because we're absolutely in the heart of exam season at Hills Road at the moment. This is really useful for students to revise from, because it means they can kind of get the key information. Oh yeah, that reminds me of this. And then they'll go off and revise further and look further into what they're looking at and kind of have further information. It's also really good for much longer text, in terms of kind of really highlighting the key points. But the key thing I kind of want everybody to take away from what we're doing at Hills Road is that we're teaching the students to use it. This is not just a resource for me. We're teaching the students how to use it appropriately. And these are some skills that I really feel that students need to know, because here are some things that actually the mainstream media sometimes doesn't cover, is that actually AI is quite dumb. It goes for the simplest answer possible because that's the quickest route from A to B. And it's with these, so the example I gave of questions, you need to challenge it further. And I was chatting with some people last week, and we were talking about that actually AI and ChatGPT in particular do make stuff up. Sometimes they take bits from here and bits from here, and it looks like it should be factually correct, but sometimes it is incorrect. So ChatGPT and the AI needs to be challenged in both directions. It needs to challenge the students harder because it can be quite simplistic, but the students also need to challenge ChatGPT and take everything it says with a grain of salt, because it could be lying or wrong. And I tell the students this from the outset: don't take everything at face value. Oh, I've kind of said that. Yes, so I use this as a sort of teaching tool to kind of actually teach students about good academic rigor. I teach them that actually you don't just take one source and believe that that is the truth. You can take multiple sources, so ChatGPT and other AI providers, to be one source, and then compare it with what your own research into Google and in books and other things actually tells you. Is it good? It's good for providing a quick answer, but is it actually correct? And it teaches my students to really actually become better students and to compare it with their own knowledge, because as with the examples I've given, I'm mostly using it for testing their own knowledge. I'm still doing the teaching. I'm still using my 30 years of experience as a music technologist to kind of teach, and then I'm using ChatGPT to do the revision resources for the students and the donkey work for me. And as we've seen already, it's not up to date. It hasn't got the most recent information. And here is something that's really interesting, and I was reminded of today. Technically, you have to be 18 to actually sign up to ChatGPT. So theoretically, most students can't use it. I don't think anybody's checking that, and certainly there's no proof or verification needed when you sign up to it. But technically, you do need to be 18 to do it. Now, most of my students in the upper six are, but not in the lower six, certainly. So it's something that ethically I need to kind of consider. Actually, should I be promoting this to my students, particularly, and I don't currently use it with my lower six, but even with my upper six, they're not all 18. So some of the last kind of things that I want to take from this, and this is just taking actually the skills of AI into the wider world, because learning AI is a skill in itself. And as with most things, it takes practice, and learning when things are right or wrong takes that level of discernment, and it takes criticality. And hopefully these skills in discernment and criticality when using something like GPT should make students better learners, because it will imbue them with a sense of that healthy criticality that will serve everybody so well as they go through life. So hopefully that's kind of given you a little taste of what we do at Hills, or how a few of us are using it at Hills, and how we're kind of using it actually not necessarily just as a tool to kind of save time and save work and prevent students having to write essays, but actually as a tool to kind of improve them as learners and become better learners. So I've got my information there, but I'm sure the slides will get presented later if anybody wants to ask me some questions or come and speak to me afterwards. Thanks very much. I believe I'm going to hand over.
Fantastic, thank you. And the questions are coming in thick and fast now, so that will be really interesting, your responses. Steve, you've been answering some, that's fantastic. I might even put the one you answered to the whole panel, because I think it's an interesting one. Maria, can I introduce you as a tech enthusiast, experienced teacher and consultant to share your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Jude, I'm going to rely on you. There's a couple things I'm going to reference as I talk that maybe you can use your mad Googling skills to find and share in the chat. So first, I want to address a couple things I didn't hear in the other sessions. I'm not going to use slides. I just wanted to talk to you all today. I teach marketing as one of the classes I teach. I teach middle schoolers and high schoolers right now. I've taught college students, adults for many years. I've taught math, chemistry, business. I teach a class called Technology and Society. I've taught ESL. I've taught a variety of subjects at a variety of levels. I even started teaching dog training this last couple months. So, I'm expanding now to non-humans. The first thing I wanted to talk about was that you may not realize it, but for the last at least 10 years, everything you see when you search the internet, unless you're looking through something like DuckDuckGo, is completely controlled by marketing and SEO. So marketers and SEO specialists have spent the last decade paying to make sure that you see their content, either by having employees that write content that optimizes search engines, or by literally paying to get your eyeballs on the page. And Google controls basically everything you see on page one, most of which is its own content that it controls. So if you think that ChatGPT is biased in some way, you need to take a step back and ask yourself, has the regular searching you've been doing on the internet actually been unbiased? And the answer to that is no, it's not. In fact, as soon as I started using ChatGPT, I realized that it was a much better experience for finding information than the internet was, especially if I was just looking for general information. There are some problems with ChatGPT making things up, but if you're looking for something like what's the difference between transplants and kidneys and livers, it's going to give you good information. If you ask very specific questions it doesn't know the answers to, it will try to make something up to answer your question. So it does better with kind of general knowledge than specific knowledge. Another thing that's important to know about ChatGPT, and I don't think I heard anyone else address it, is that it has what's called a temperature setting. And if you're looking for a more detailed explanation of this is where I'm going to have Jude look something up for me. Stephen Wolfram has an article and a talk about how ChatGPT works. And the talk is on YouTube and the article is on one of his Wolfram sites. And it's a really great explanation of how these language models use a temperature setting to create the English language. And the long and the short of it is that you might think it's looking for the most common the highest probability words to use in the model, but it actually specifically does not. It looks for like an 80% temperature setting, which means that whatever the most likely word is, it's not choosing that, because when we talk as humans, we don't do that either, which makes it really lousy at very specific things. And it's why it was so bad at things like math originally. Because if you look at solving a math problem, there's one most common answer to that problem, and it was specifically told not to use it, right? And so it would have all the language and how to solve the problem mostly correct. And then when it goes at its less than 100% temperature setting, it specifically rejects the most common answer, right? And so that gives you some insight into why it's been bad at some subjects. And there's been an attempt now to modify it so that when it does things like math and science, it does better, right? And if you ask it something that there is no information on, it was very bad at first. It would make it up. It has gotten better. Things that I could get it to do back in January, it won't do anymore. So you have to just keep testing it. It changes every week. But this is all to say that I think that if I could have a ChatGPT version with some topic guardrails and live data to use in education, I would far, far prefer it to searching the internet as a way for students to find answers to their questions, because it is very fast. It gives them answers quickly. As long as it's general knowledge, it does a pretty good job. When I send them to do internet searches, First, it has to go through a filter, which takes a couple seconds. Then a whole bunch of the stuff is filtered out. Sometimes the searches are not even allowed. So for example, for my marketing students, we're studying social media marketing, and in K-12, all social media sites are blocked, which means they can't even search for articles about TikTok or Instagram because all of that stuff is blocked by the filters, right? But inside of ChatGPT, if it could answer their questions, that would be great, right? So I think there's, these systems aren't perfect, and they're certainly a pain. But I would far prefer having an intelligent ChatGPT system to answer questions than searching the internet in general. Plus, the number of ads that students get exposed to by looking on the internet in general is like ludicrous. I am I'm Gen X, and I think that Gen X has a very unique perspective on the world because our childhood was spent without computers. Our young childhood was spent without computers, and then computers kind of came of age as we did. And so we had a very classical education. We were exposed to all of the concepts of education without much computing power. And so we know, we have an innate sense of knowledge and principles. And then we grew up as adults using computers, right? And I share this because when I was in school, there were these huge scandals about showing us 5 minutes of news in school because the news channels would have commercials. The kids' news channels would have commercials, and we couldn't possibly expose kids to commercials in schools. But the number of ads these students see as they're searching the internet, watching YouTube videos, like playing games on websites, like it's nothing but ads the entire day, right? And that is crazy to me. So I would far prefer to have a system without advertisement that students would use. Let's see, that gets me through 1, 2, 3, 4. I actually found 2 this year as I was teaching in K-12. I teach a topic called Technology and Society, and it's completely new curriculum, teaches students about infrastructure and how the world around them works and how it developed over time and how it impacted society. And I actually found that the best source of information for teaching this class, since there are no existing textbooks on the topic, was YouTube. Finding an expert on YouTube who talks about the specific topics I wanted to discuss was the best way for me to find information. And when I started teaching the course in August, that meant processing the transcript from YouTube myself, coming up, watching dozens of YouTube videos to find the right one to use in class. All of that has gotten faster with ChatGPT, being able to process the transcripts, look for key vocabulary. I don't even have to watch the whole videos to reject some and know that this is not the right video anymore. But it's interesting to me that YouTube has become a more valuable source of information than Google has. And I think that's partially also related to the fact that in education, we tend to focus all of our energies around activities involving reading and writing, forgetting that reading and writing are not a normal human activity. In the thousands of years of human development, it is only in the most recent couple hundred years that the majority of humans have been reading and writing. And actually, if we're talking about the majority of humans, only the last 100 years, which means that we are not genetically adapted to reading and writing. We haven't had anywhere near enough time to become natural readers and writers. And if YouTube had been available to the education system 200 years ago, I'm quite sure that our education system would be video-based, not text-based. And so one of the things I think that's amazing about ChatGPT and some of the new tools we have is that maybe we can start shifting our efforts away from everything being reading and writing to a variety of sources of information that can help students to learn. As humans, we are built to watch other people do things and interact with them. And we may be getting closer to that with the ChatGPT tools and all of the really great content that has been produced in places like YouTube. As far as a strength for education, one of the things I didn't hear previously, but I think is a really great strength of these tools, is that we've been trying for years to have more active learning in classrooms, and somewhat successfully in some places and unsuccessfully in others. And these tools are fantastic for assisting teachers in creating better active learning faster. The problem with active learning has always been that the first time you go about creating some kind of active learning activity, it takes a lot of time to do it. You have to pre-prepare everything for class. And then the idea is when you're in class, the students do a lot of talking to each other and they're learning from that conversation and from their interaction with the material, but that's a lot of upfront preparation. And that lift has just gone way, way down. So one of the things I do in class a ton is a lot of these like card-based activities where I pre-prepare cards for the students to sort into categories, or statements that are true and false before we learn about a topic. And what I'm doing is focusing on what do you already know, and then what are you learning as we go, and what do you know now, right? And but this pre-prep stuff used to take 4 or 5 hours for an hour of class, which was untenable for most teachers, right? Now it takes maybe like 30, 45 minutes instead, which is still a lot of time to prep for 45-minute class, but it's less than it used to be. And that's really, really helpful. And I think something we can do to get to a more interesting classroom experience for students, which is probably what's now required given all of the technologies we have. I think ChatGPT is also great for, and other similar tools for making alternative content for students with special needs. That was also a big lift for K-12 and here in the US. You have the regular lesson plan you make for your class, and then you have all of the many lesson plans you have to make for students that have special needs. And it's much easier to get that kind of stuff now, to be able to take a body of text and say, can you please rewrite this text at a different reading level? Or can you make a graphic organizer for this story for me? Or things like that were just very burdensome on the teacher and are now much, much easier with the help of AI. We've had several teachers who've discovered that as an administrative tool, ChatGPT is great at writing behavior letters to parents about their students. Another kind of onerous task that teachers have. They want to follow up with parents. They want to, try to fix behavior issues, but it's a lot of work for all of the students you have that have those problems. So that is a useful thing. I think that for helping grading, these tools are going to be amazing once they're integrated into the learning management systems and the other products we use. And they've been kind of field tested and fixed in the same way that the open models have been field tested with all of the millions of users and tweaked from that, right? I don't think we're there yet, which is why we're seeing some of the problems we're seeing. But one of the things I want to warn you about in terms of what you guys call marking schemes, or what we call rubrics, are that if your entire assignment can be done by ChatGPT, all of these rubrics and schemes are pretty much meaningless now. Because if you're grading with a rubric and the student has completed all the items, you're going to give them 100, because there's nothing in your rubric that addresses, has the assignment been done by the student? And so one of the things I've had to do, especially for more creative assignments, is to assignments where students might very well use ChatGPT to help them, and I allow them to. I now grade on basically a 0, competent, or excellent scheme. And we talk together about what would be a competent submission and what would be an excellent submission. And then we kind of make a list of things that would be included for both. And when they submit their assignments, I give them 0, you need to resubmit, an 80, you can resubmit for excellent or an excellent. And so with both a 0 or an 80, I tell them what they need to do to improve. And this also allows me to address things like if I'm pretty sure the whole assignment was done by ChatGPT, to address exactly how they need to fix it before I'll give it an 80. And this is also new, that there's almost no way to create a competent rubric that'll last you 2 weeks, because the systems get better every week or two, right? And so the only way to really address this for my more creative assignments has been to just move to a competency-based grading model and abandon the rubrics. Honestly, I found that when I was using the rubrics, I had to give students who had used ChatGPT hundreds. They'd met all the rubric criteria because ChatGPT is good at that, right? So last, I think, is just around agency and meaning of assignments. If an assignment doesn't have meaning to the student, especially at the college level, I don't think there's a super likelihood that the student is going to do the work themselves. With these kinds of tools available to help them, both in the workplace and in the educational setting, the only reason to do the work yourself is if you know that you will get meaning out of it, that you will learn things you need to learn. So to understand why you need to learn the things yourself, to do something that's interesting to you, or that has emotional value for you. These are the kinds of things we need to think about in our assignments. And I think we need much more flexible learning management systems for this kind of stuff. Like I'm taking a bunch of education classes right now for my teaching license, because apparently teaching for 30 years in multiple subjects does not actually qualify you to teach in K-12. So as I'm taking these education classes, I'm finding that I just don't do some assignments. I go look at how many points I need to pass the class, and I decide these 5 assignments I'm not doing this semester because they're not meaningful to me and I can pass the class without them, right? But what this has led me to kind of realize, I mean, if I had to do the assignments, I would probably be using ChatGPT to do them because they don't have any meaning for me. But the other 15 assignments I'll do, right? And I'll do them well and I'll learn from them. And what this made me realize is that we need more flexible schemes for classes. We need to be able to say, like, there are 20 assignments in this class. Here is how they are spaced over the class. You need to choose 15 of them to do and submit them on the due dates for the 15 you've chosen, right? None of our learning management systems do this, right? None of our learning management say, like, here are 3 possible projects, or you can propose a 4th, propose what you'd like to do. I'll approve it and give you kind of a rubric for it, and then you can continue on, right? Nothing is built for this. And so I think that we need much more flexible systems to create that sense of agency for students, that sense of emotional connection, motivation. And then one of the things I'm doing in the classroom as part of this is, because I have the luxury of having an in-person classroom, is doing some of the pre-work for larger projects in person, where they talk to each other about the steps of the project, they pitch each other their ideas, they write down some of that material. And so I have all of those kind of anchors to use as okay, so is your project really your project when you turn it in? Like, I've seen it all along the way. Is it really yours, when you get there? So anyways, those are some of my thoughts about where we're at right now. And I'll just put in the chat if you're interested in hearing more from me. I have stopped using Twitter because it has some really interesting problems right now. So the best bet is to follow me on LinkedIn, or I'll give you my website and you can subscribe to get updates there.
Brilliant, thank you. And we have so many people who have been asking questions. So I think what I'm going to do is start and hand them to you all. Thank you. That's been an amazing set of insights into the theory and practice as it is unfolding at the moment. So there's a question for Tim, but it might also be relevant to both of the rest of you. This is from Rosie Bopare, who's the head of computing at St Bede's Interchurch School in Cambridge. They've been experimenting with ChatGPT for learning Python. In your eyes, what are the benefits and potential drawbacks of AI for supporting practical learning in secondary schools and sixth forms? Should we incorporate AI tools into teacher training? That's a Steve question in a way, particularly given the shortage of teachers with specialist knowledge. Do you want to start, Tim, and then Steve pick up the other half of it?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I can talk into teacher training as well, because last year I was working at the Institute of Education training teachers. I think, so the role of, I've actually written the question down so I can read it. My answer is kind of depends on the subject. So I think teaching coding, it could be potentially beneficial, get students to create some code themselves, compare their code with what an AI bot thinks the code should look like. And it could be good to compare notes and see what's good, what's bad. So I tried to get it to build me a circuit design the other day, and it was very variable quality what it was offering me compared to kind of my knowledge of circuits elsewhere. Whereas, so I saw another question come in asking me about my own subject as well. And I think, and this kind of also links into what Maria was saying in terms of rubrics and mark schemes and things. So actually the rubrics in my subject are really, really woolly. And actually I've fed questions and answers into AI and got it to output answers, and the answers it's giving are very, very basic, and would do very badly on the rubric because they're kind of quite woolly and they require interpretation and nuance and kind of understanding and analysis that ChatGPT and its equivalents just can't do.
Did you give it the rubric or just the question?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I gave it the whole mark.
You give it the rubric, it actually does better.
Yeah, no, I fed it the rubric, but it was so woolly, and because it involved listening, which it can't do. So it was, it was. Good point. Good point.
I think one of the issues here is you can't really stay ahead of it, right? Like you can make minor moves to like save yourself for now, but like especially in college, like in the US, you make a syllabus and you have to live with it for 4 months, right? And if you make your syllabus and ChatGPT moves on you, then suddenly you have not accounted for the new thing it does, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I think teachers should be made aware of it in teacher training. Steve, what do you think? Your mic's off again.
I'm back on. Yes, it's been quite an imperative here in the Faculty of Education here, where we train primary and secondary teachers, to really think about, because it's happened so fast, about what the implications are and what the implications of teachers going into this, because this technology is not going away. So it will be increasingly part of education, and how that will look is difficult to predict at the moment. I would certainly think about one of the things that was picked up in there is around coding. And the GPT-4 model is particularly good at generating code when you give it a specific prompt to write code for a particular task. I've just tried Python, but that's very good in a way, because I learned to program in different languages a long time ago, and very quickly I found I was becoming familiar with a new programming language, and I was able to then run that program and find errors, but I was also able to put the error codes back into and troubleshoot it. Now, I was very interested in how the potential then of teaching and learning in coding. And I talked to computer science people about coding and large language models, and they said what it does is capable of developing code, and therefore can be used by students to develop their coding skills. But if you want a really, really refined program, it does need expert interventions, because it might find more efficient ways in which aspects of a program might work together. So it'll do it'll build a prototype with assistance student. But I think the value is that potentially you can get quite a sophisticated program working quite quickly So that's very powerful, and I've seen that, and it's a huge opportunity in thinking about how access to coding might be more inclusive, because you don't just have to be somebody who knows that particular language. You just have to think about the problems that you want to solve and then start experimenting with prompts and running the programs.
Great, thank you. Well, that's a comprehensive answer. Thank you. So Rebecca Davis has posed a question very early on saying, if students are using ChatGPT and AI to help them study, how will they know when they are being presented with incorrect information about something? She sees it as a problem because they're not yet, if they use it, non-experts won't recognize the problems with what they're consuming. How do you recommend teachers cope with that and pick up when the students are doing that? Open that to either of you. Maria, do you want to?
I'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this is one of the reasons I brought up Gen X, because we have we have a pre-internet understanding of the world, and then grew up with computers and the internet, right? And so I think we can see the internet for its flaws as well as its potential. One of the things I'm actually quite worried about for the corporate world, I've had some conversations with some fairly high-level people in the corporate world about this, who do like training and development for companies with thousands and thousands of employees. And if ChatGPT starts to take away the kind of more mundane tasks, the tasks that give you kind of an innate understanding of the field you're in because of practice and seeing small tweaks, then how do you develop people to come in at higher levels than that if they've never had that initial understanding of how something works? Like if you have never written copy yourself, how do you know if ChatGPT is writing good copy for you, right? And I think that's the same thing we're facing in education. If you've never learned the principles yourself, how do you know if ChatGPT is actually feeding you correct principles or not? But then I have to go back to the internet wasn't feeding you good stuff either, right? It was feeding you what was marketed to you. But this is why I use a variety of activities now to get at what do you know already before we dive into a topic, right? Because as the teacher, I can then address like, okay, what do we think is true? What do we think is false? I'll share in the chat an example activity that you can download of something that I do with students around this, where they literally sort statements into definitely true, maybe false, definitely false before we start. And so we're getting at what the initial knowledge is, and we will discuss a few of the things they think are definitely true or false before we start. But we have to start addressing like those particular things. And that's why I think it's so important that when we have students in a classroom, especially in like the lower grades classes where they still come to school, they're not learning online, that's the most important thing we can do in the classroom is have them talk to each other, discuss, ask questions, correct principles that are not there, make sure that they do have the standard principles underlying what they know, right? The truth is that by the time these kids are adults, we probably won't have these problems in AI anymore. I'm not even sure we'll have these problems in AI in 2025, right? As this stuff is being field tested, it's being fixed, and they're coming up with smarter ways to do things. And a lot of that has to do with those temperature settings and how we treat different subjects, right? So yeah, those are my thoughts. I've
got a book here that I'm working on my way through at the moment, which is kind of all about this. So it's called Machine Learning and Human Intelligence. I haven't read it all yet, but I'm working my way through that. I think it's kind of is heading in that direction.
You pop it in the chat if you would like to. That'll be great. I have a quick fire round. Brian Alexander says, have you compared ChatGPT with competitors like Bing or Bard? Just a quick yes or no. And
yes, informally. Yes. And GPT-4 is the most powerful large language model available, and that's why it's of such interest. The competitors seem, I'm talking to computer people in the university here, Google and competitors seem a long way behind with their models at the moment. So
yeah, we've informally tried Bard at Hills as well. It's very, very basic at the moment.
Okay, great. That's useful from some experts already. Andy Smart, do you find you're using the word truth more often now in your teaching? And is this something you've explored? What other implications might this have for teaching in general?
Well, I've been. This is interesting because this is, there's been, as I talk to the university and similar in schools, there's a great deal of soul searching about what we actually do now, what knowledge means. So, for instance, this is the situation now that where students can come to university or in school, and the issues around getting their ideas in the appropriate form, whatever it is the study, is assisted. That's the primary assistance potentially of large language models. So they're not worried about getting them in the right essay form or the right structure. You've got assistants to do that. So it's getting the ideas. So the question is what are we for and what knowledge is here? And the important thing to think about, as I keep stressing, is, the difference between searching and knowledge and what large language is doing with meaning. Large language models are not connected to the internet at any point. This is just a statistical recognition of patterns and meanings. There's no reference to any information or knowledge within that.
In my teaching, no, I would say I'm not using the word truth that much more. It's just kind of, but I might be encouraging students to question things more.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. James has asked Tim specifically, what do you think about the role of AI in music technology?
So I sort of answered that in one of the previous questions as well, and I've replied to them directly. So like there are AI generators that create music, and there's this kind of big thing that appeared on, I think it was TikTok. I mean, I'm not on TikTok, so I'm not really aware of what's going on, but where they'd taken samples of Drake's vocal and The Weeknd's vocal and created an entirely new track, and the kind of ethics and kind of technology behind that, and whether that was because then technically neither Drake nor The Weeknd had any role in creating that, but they were getting the credit for it even though they weren't involved. And it was a really interesting kind of study point, but actually kind of most AI generated music is actually pretty awful. And what people are doing when you hear that example, what is actually happened is that they're taking kind of snippets of the sounds from the voices, and people are actually creating new music. The music isn't necessarily created using AI, but the voice is assembled and the lyrics are assembled using AI to kind of create the sound of those vocals. So it's not entirely fully AI generated. And I think, as Maria has reminded me, I need to use the word yet more. I think it's going to become hugely relevant, but it might not be used in the way that we kind of think. It's more likely to become a tool in terms of it will be using it to analyze kind of frequency responses and kind of using it to kind of hear different things, sort of analyze things in different ways. And I suspect it's not going to replace the musician or the music producer, but we'll be using it as a tool in the same way 20 years ago I wouldn't have dreamed of using auto-tune. I now use it on everything I do. It's the next tool potentially.
Brilliant, thank you. Angelina,
can I jump in with one thing?
Please do.
I've been thinking about here. I think that there's been a need to restructure some things in education ever since we got smartphones, actually, because we now carry information around pretty much in our hands and have access to it at all times, right? And so this idea that like, well, what if you're on a desert island and you don't have that? I'm like, well, if you're on a desert island, you need very specific survival skills that probably don't have a lot to do with the facts educators think people need to remember, right? It's a very specific set of skills. And so I actually think even more so now, and I could be potentially biased because of this class I'm teaching, that we need to restructure what our educational silo subjects are. We primarily teach reading and writing in the lower levels because that's the way you accessed all information 200 years ago, right? But our students today, they are born into a world where technology completely surrounds them. That is their natural world. In their natural world, water comes from a tap, electricity comes from an outlet, and devices entertain them, right? And I don't at all understand how any of those things work. And in our classical training of science and our classical training of programming, we don't address this stuff much. Like, how does the world around you actually function? It's complex and it's fragile, and it relies on supply chain, complicated international supply chains, and materials that are in the ground that are necessary to build our EV cars and our electronics devices and things like that. And there is almost no teaching of this in schools. And that to me is a problem, because the citizens we need now need to understand all those things. It's not understanding classical physics principles that are going to help our world survive. I mean, we need some people to understand those clearly, but we need citizens to understand the fragility and complexity of the world, and how society changed as all of these things changed, and how it's likely to change in the future, be able to make predictions about how it's likely to change in the future. I just don't see that as a subject in our schools right now. And so, this class that I teach, I think is some of the missing curriculum, and I'm sure there's others, right, where we teach them about the world around them, and there's so much science and math and history that you teach along with that. And it's hung on things that the students are interested in about how the world functions, right? So I think I'm very optimistic that ChatGPT is actually going to force us to rethink some things in a serious way, and that will come out of it better off in what we teach and how we teach it.
Thank you. A slight backward step here, but maybe you're the front runners, and there are people who aren't quite there yet. Angelina says, have you had an opportunity to unpack why so many teachers are indifferent? Is there any correlation between the type of subject they teach, their age, their general IT capabilities?
I can unpack that. I've done several workshops directly with teachers, and most of them haven't taken a look at it because they are exhausted looking at products that are ed tech that were supposed to change their life and actually made things harder, right? They're exhausted by it. And they just hear, oh, ChatGPT. If they've opened it, they used it like a student would use it to see what a student would get out of it. And it never occurred to them to ask it to help them with a behavior problem they're having in class, or to ask it to help them write a modified curriculum for a student with special needs. They didn't think to use it like they would use it. They only thought to use it as a student would use it because that's what they were hearing about, right? And so most of them, when you just go through this simple activity of like, how would you actually use it to help you? ChatGPT is your assistant. If I gave you a college-age student who was book smart and said, you may use this person to do anything you would like try things, right? And so I think it's just like they haven't seen it through that lens, and they're exhausted from ed tech products that don't actually help much and create more work.
Yeah, I would support most of that. So obviously I have a role for that at Hills Road, is supporting ed tech. And the idea with my role is that I'm supposed to filter out all the dross and only present them with the stuff that is helpful. But even then, some of them are still getting to grips with Teams. Some of them are still getting to grips with class notebooks. Some of them are still getting to grips with computers, full stop. I would say that is, one maybe out of our whole staff. I don't have anyone in mind, but there's still, technology learning is a journey, and yes, we might all be sort of interested in the cutting edge, but a lot of people aren't. What they're interested in is doing the best for their students, and they know what works for them, and they know they can get results. And we might be sort of saying, actually, have you tried this? It makes your life easier. But actually, they have, as Maria says, they're exhausted. They haven't got time to think about that. They just want to, they don't think about that.
Yeah, I can second or third of that. Now, someone, anonymous attendee, has said something which kind of feeds back to Bard, saying it's been getting lots of lyrical praise. I wonder whether that, in some of the newsletters, I wonder whether that's the marketing, Maria, that you were talking about generally, rather than that it is doing the job better. If you're all saying it's not quite as good and quite basic. Okay, so Ian, moving on to his question, he said, thank you for the presentations. We're concentrating here on a single product, but there are already many more customized uses of AI in education products. Great example of how safety, trust, and teacher control feedback is the work being done by Sal Khan with Khan Migo. Can the panel share their thoughts on the approach that Sal and others are doing to add safety guardrails and feedback loops to AI solutions? And Sal Khan's the founder of Khan Academy. Yes. Okay. So anyone want to tackle the safety guardrails and feedback loops question?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't used many of the derivatives that use GPT-4. I mean, I know Khan Academy, Duolingo built those into their systems now, and whether this is it's starting to, the process of starting to build applications from ChatGPT or GPT-4 for specific educational purposes. So obviously a smart tutor is a really useful one. What I think is important, both at university level and in schools, is primarily before we get use too many derivative applications, which might be important and useful and clearly are at times, is by using the raw model. GPT-4 itself, that's an important learning experience. And this also addresses the question about teachers. I have to admit, to really understand ChatGPT and GPT-4, I spent some considerable time understanding how it's working at a practical level and at a theoretical level. And few people have time to do that. But it's important to understand what this technology does, because, as I say, it's so different. It's an entirely different thing from how we've understood searching knowledge or storing knowledge in databases. And to come to terms with that and find out how it's useful is the most important thing. Now, as people start to use it, and my research is really about how people use it and how people are making use of it in the context of higher education, in the context of schools, and then looking to develop higher level applications from that emergent kind of use. And I think that makes more sustainable use of it and makes more use of the technology, rather than necessarily, these particular, I don't know whether the Khan Academy is any more safe than ChatGPT. It's difficult to say. The more safety, the more limitations, but that's an important trade-off at times.
Anyone else? Oh, okay, great, thank you. Carla Ayerts says, we're not genetic, she's quoting you, Maria, we're not genetically predisposed to reading and writing. But she's saying audio is very powerful and we've ignored our ears, hearing being probably the first and last thing we do as human beings. It seems that ChatGPT and generative AI revolution is also ignoring this innate ability, overtaken by visual culture. Can you see this changing, I guess, or is this just driven by the ads and marketeers?
I can totally see this changing. If you just put together some of the tools we have right now, it'll change. So first, I actually use an extension on my browser called voice and speech to text. So actually most of the prompts I give to ChatGPT, I'm just speaking them to ChatGPT, not writing them, because that became tiresome. It's just a matter of time before it starts speaking back. But I think more importantly, what it will do, we already have AI tools built off of this technology that can create videos. from text with very realistic voices. So I give it a year or less before we have some version of this where you can talk to it and the face of your choice, the character of your choice talks back to tell you about it, right? And what we don't have right now in these tools are saved settings, right? Like I can't save a setting that says, right now, I want you to only create materials at a 6th grade level that would appeal to middle schoolers, right? I have to tell it that every time, which is why I'm using voice to text, by the way, because I get tired of doing it, right? I do have like saved prompts I use and things like that. But the problem with the temperature setting is you never get the same thing twice, which is another problem right now. So even if you give it very specific directions, it chooses like 80% of the directions to follow each time and ignores the other 20%. So you're always having to re-prompt it to get what you want, right? And despite the fact that it's way easier than it used to be to get these things, it still becomes tiresome. So when we get to systems that save some of your settings, that allow you to switch between personas, that build in the video technology with the written technology, I think we'll get there. So it's like what I keep saying, we're just not there yet. This technology came out November 30th of last year, and it is now May 18th. It is not even 6 months old yet, right? And just look at how far it's come in 6 months, right? There's a brand new Coke ad that used some of the Stable Diffusion AI, and it's incredible. It used Stable Diffusion AI to create a bunch of the video in it, and it is just an incredible ad. So Carla, I think it's coming. I just give it a few minutes in the grand scheme of human development, and we'll be there. Jude,
sorry. Yeah, I am. Got it. Yeah, got that. Thank you very much indeed. We are actually out of time. So we have very few questions. Perhaps a last one with a thumbs or a thumbs down. There are no adverts on ChatGPT. Is it making anyone any money? Does anyone know yet? It's not going to become like
ChatGPT has subscribers. They're using a subscriber model right now,
yes, of course.
It's far preferred by me to an advertising model, right?
Yeah.
Bard is being incorporated into Google search. So that's an advertising model, right? But I'm glad to see actually that they're developing some of these things that are not ad-based, that they're subscription-based. And I think we all need to get a little bit more used to paying for the things that are useful to us. In education in particular, I mean, I don't know, you guys probably don't know this, but I used to run an ed tech company. I built a company and sold it a couple of years ago. And one of the hardest things is that education can't pay for, that phrase parents have, we just can't have nice things. Guess what? In education, we just can't have nice things either, because schools can't afford to pay for the technology that's actually any good. And as soon as they hit this point where all they can do is survive on the income, then the only new things that get built are the new things that might get them new business, not the new things that would actually enhance the use of every person using the platform. That stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't get them new business. It's only the features that might get them new business that matter to the company at that point, because there's not enough income coming in for the rest, right? And so we have to get used to saying, this is a good product. We will pay for it and support it so that it gets better. And some of that is, government support and all of that. But one of the things I think that would be the most interesting development of the world is if every teacher in the entire world had a spending budget for technology of $1,000 a year, that they personally decided what technology to put it towards, not the school system, not the government, but the teacher, because the teacher knows what's working and what's not. And the teachers actually almost have no budget to do this unless it's their personal budget. Like almost every tool I use on top of what the school provides, I end up paying something for if I really like it, right? And that can't be allowed to continue. That is not how the regular marketplace works, right? That is not how the rest of the business marketplace works. They pay money for the tools that are useful to them. And we need to start doing the same thing. And something needs to correct that imbalance.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point and an excellent one to end on. I think that was the case pre-tech, but is even more the case now because there are so many useful things out there. Thank you so much for your enthusiasm, everybody, and your attending and posting so many questions. I have put in a series of links just in the chat, contacts for Maria and the DEFI links as well, if you aren't already and want to be receiving mailings and update events from us at DEFI. I've also put in a couple of people that I also watch, as well as Maria. Dan Fitzpatrick is a Newcastle, UK-based, who's done a really useful 40 proven AI prompts for educators. Might be something you find useful. Ethan Mollick is an American professor. He's also interesting to watch, just to get you started or whet your appetite if you've been holding out on ChatGPT. I'd also like to promote our next webinar on the 13th of July, which is entitled EdTech Enables Inclusion, or Does It? So that's another area that we're quite interested in. We'd love to see you there. Thank you very much indeed, and have good evenings or afternoons, depending on where you are. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.